In the land of Shiloh, at a time when judges still ruled Israel, there lived a man named Eli. He was not just another face in the crowd. He was the high priest, the spiritual leader of a people who wavered between obedience and rebellion like a boat on the high seas, without a rudder or direction. Eli carried the weight of an entire people on his shoulders, their doubts, their offerings, their guilt. And there, before the altar day after day, he did the same thing. He offered sacrifices, lit the incense, and kept alive the flame of what remained of Israel's faith. He was already an old man when the curtains of his story began to move. His face bore the marks of one who had seen wars, sins, and miracles. His eyes, still open, were beginning to fail, as if the world around him was growing darker, more distant. But he was still the priest, the mediator between God and men, respected, feared, perhaps even feared more than listened to. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. The people saw him as someone steadfast, a pillar, but there are cracks that only time reveals. Eli was devout, yes. But devout enough? He saw what many did not see, or pretended not to see. He smelled sin more than the aroma of incense. Shiloh was sacred, but it was surrounded by a cold, almost automatic routine. And in the midst of it all, Eli stood his ground, like an ancient statue forgotten in the temple. But God does not forget. And while the old priest maintained the appearance of control, something was about to slip through his fingers. Because there was something, or rather someone, very close to him, right under his roof, walking toward the abyss. And Eli knew it. He knew, and yet he did nothing. On the outside, everything seemed to be in place. Eli wore the priestly ephod, followed the rituals, knew every detail of the law. The people saw him and thought, there is the man of God. And in a way, he was. But there was something different about Eli, something you couldn't see in his eyes, but you could feel in the air. A kind of weariness that didn't come only from age, but from within, as if his soul were running on autopilot. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, when to raise his hands and when to lower his eyes, but the faith that once burned in his chest now seemed like a warm ember, kept alive only by habit. He was a man who knew the ways of God, but he had stopped walking in them long ago. Even so, Eli remained there day after day, holding down the fort, answering questions, judging cases, offering sacrifices, like someone trying to keep a house standing while the ground shakes beneath his feet. And the people, unaware of what was hidden behind that religious facade, continued to trust him. After all, he was the priest. Who would dare question him? But not everything remained hidden. Some things were already beginning to come out of the shadows. Rumors about his sons were growing. Voices whispered about strange behavior, disrespect for the altar, abuse of office. But Eli, when confronted with the truth, acted like someone who hears a storm in the distance and prefers to believe it will pass. He knew that Hophni and Phinehas were crossing the line. He knew they were playing with fire, sacred fire. And yet he said little, demanded even less. A warning here, a scolding there, nothing that would really change the course of history. And while he hesitated, while he closed his eyes to what was already burning before everyone, his own sons dug a hole so deep that even the altar could not hide it. And it was at that very moment that a woman, weeping silently before God, entered the temple, and Eli saw her. He just didn't realize that in that encounter, history was beginning to change direction. Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons, had the title, the right clothes, the prominent places. But that was all. Inside, they had already sold their souls to contempt for sacred things. They had no fear, no shame. They acted as if the altar were an extension of their own home, and God an employee they could give orders to. The two took the best parts of the sacrifices before they were even burned, even though they knew that these were holy, reserved for God. If the people questioned them, they threatened them. The offering ceased to be an act of faith and became a dirty collection made with greed and abuse. It was as if the altar had become a market, and they were the owners of the stall. But it didn't stop there. Hophni and Phinehas also lay with women who served at the door of the tent of meeting. There, in the place where people sought God's presence, they committed sin without any shame. It was blatant profanity, day after day. And Eli, he knew everything. From time to time, he would rebuke them. He would say, "What I hear from you is not good." But it was like trying to put out a fire with a cup of water. Loose words, no action, no discipline, no punishment, like a father too tired to fight, or a priest afraid of losing his children. Even though he had already lost them, the people were already talking. Respect for the priesthood was beginning to crumble. And God heard every conversation, every mocking laugh, every silence from Eli. Divine patience is not weak, but it has limits, and the limit was near. It was in this heavy atmosphere, with the sacred being mocked within God's own house, that the woman returned to the temple. The same woman Eli thought was drunk. She didn't know it yet, but she carried in her womb something that God was about to use, not only to answer her pain, but to turn the whole story upside down. Hannah returned to the temple with her eyes fixed, but her heart still hurting. For years, she had carried the pain of not being able to have children. Every pregnancy of others was a cruel reminder of what she did not have. And as if the silent pain were not enough, there was Peninnah, her rival, who made a point of provoking her. Year after year, Hannah went up to Shiloh to pray. And on that day, her prayer was different. It was almost a choked-up outburst, whispered without sound, tears falling relentlessly. That's when Eli saw her, and he was mistaken. He thought she was drunk. He, of all people, the priest, confusing despair with drunkenness. A sad irony, but Hannah, with the strength of someone who had grown accustomed to being misunderstood, explained, "No, my lord, I am just pouring out my soul before the Lord." And Eli, upon hearing this, stepped back. He didn't know it, but he was standing before a woman who had more faith than all of his children combined. Without really understanding, he simply replied, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked." A simple phrase, but something in it changed the course of history, because Hannah left there with the certainty that God had heard her, and God did hear her. Shortly thereafter, she became pregnant. A boy was born. It wasn't just a son. It was the answer. It was the fulfillment of a vow. Hannah named him Samuel, because I asked him from the Lord. And when he was weaned, she took the boy to the temple, and she handed him over to Eli. Yes, that same Eli, who could barely correct his own children. Now he had before him a boy, given as a living offering, separated from the womb. A boy who did not belong to him, but whom he would have to care for. And there, amid sacrifices and rituals, Samuel began to grow up, quiet, observant, like someone who listens more than he speaks. While Hophni and Phinehas sank lower and lower, Samuel grew before God. And soon, heaven would speak again, but this time it would not be to the old priest. Samuel was small when he arrived at the temple, but he brought something that no one else there had: purity. A clean heart, ready. Unlike Eli's sons, who had become accustomed to playing with the sacred, Samuel approached the things of God with respect. His steps were light, his words few. He made no noise, but he attracted attention. Not because he wanted to. It was heaven that was looking at him. Eli received him as one who fulfills a duty. Taking care of Samuel was part of his agreement with Hannah, and he took it seriously. He taught him the rituals, showed him the ways of the temple, explained how the offerings worked. And Samuel absorbed everything. Every gesture, every prayer, every smell of burning incense became part of him. He was like a sponge, silent but full. Meanwhile, outside, the comments about Hophni and Phinehas grew. They continued to steal portions of the sacrifices and sleep with women at the door of the tent. And Eli continued to talk, but not to act. The people began to drift away, their trust in the priesthood slowly crumbling like a cracked cup about to burst. And in the midst of this chaos, Samuel grew, an almost unnoticed detail, but not by the heavens. Once an offering was made, and Samuel helped prepare everything. Then he swept the courtyard, arranged the lamps, and gathered the ashes. All without complaining. It was as if the boy understood, even without words, that he was there for something greater. The nights were quiet in Shiloh, but there was a weight in the air, as if the temple itself knew that something was about to happen. Eli slept, tired. His sons were oblivious, and Samuel, there in the dark, listened to the sound of the wind, until one early morning a voice called him. A voice he had never heard before, but which somehow seemed familiar. It was night in Shiloh, and the silence of the temple seemed denser than usual. Eli's eyes no longer saw well, and his tired body rested in a chair. Samuel, as always, slept nearby. But that morning the silence was broken by something different. A voice called his name, Samuel. The boy got up immediately and ran to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" Eli, half asleep, replied that he hadn't, telling him to go back to bed. But the voice came again and again, 3 times. Only then did Eli realize this was not a dream, it was not a reverie, it was God himself calling the boy. The 4th time, Samuel answered the voice as Eli had instructed him, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And God spoke. But it was not a sweet word, nor a peaceful promise. It was a sentence, harsh, heavy, like a stone thrown against glass. The Lord revealed that he would bring judgment upon Eli's house, and it would not be just any correction. It was final. He said that the sins of the priest's sons would not be forgiven, neither by sacrifices nor by offerings, because Eli knew what they were doing. He knew, and yet he did not stop them. Samuel's heart sank. It was a lot for a boy to hear. But the next day, Eli called him. He wanted to know what God had said. Samuel hesitated. He didn't want to tell him, but Eli insisted. And so the boy told him everything, every word. Eli listened in silence. No tears, no despair. He just said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what he thinks is best." It was as if he already knew there was no turning back, as if, deep down, he had already accepted the end. But the end had not yet come. Outside, the people of Israel were arming themselves for war, and Hophni and Phinehas, even though they were steeped in sin, were about to do something that would put the entire nation at risk. The Philistines rose up against Israel, and the tension spread like wildfire. The people panicked. They were losing the war. The first battle was a disaster. 4,000 Israelites were killed. It was as if God had turned his face away. And in the midst of the confusion, someone had an idea. "Let's go get the Ark of the Covenant. If it is with us, we will win." It seemed like faith, but it was desperation in disguise. The Ark, symbol of God's presence, became almost a talisman. And who went to fetch it? Hophni and Phinehas, of all people, those who mocked the offerings, those who slept with women at the door of the temple. Now they themselves marched with the ark in their hands, as if they were pure, as if God could be manipulated. When the ark arrived at the camp, there were shouts, euphoria, such a commotion that even the Philistines were frightened. Something has happened. Their God has arrived. But God's presence does not walk with appearances. And on that day, appearances fell to the ground. The next battle was even worse. 30,000 Israelites died. The ark was taken by the Philistines, and Hophni and Phinehas also died on the same battlefield, on the same day. A judgment that had already been announced, fulfilled with precision. While chaos spread across the field, in Shiloh, Eli waited. He sat almost blind, his heart heavy, but he did not tremble for his sons. The text says that his greatest fear was for the ark. And when the messenger arrived, bringing news of defeat, of deaths, and of the theft of the ark, Eli fell backward. He hit his head, broke his neck, and died right there. He was 98 years old. The old priest, who began respected, ended defeated. And the impact was so strong that it reached the home of his son, Phinehas. Phinehas's wife was about to give birth when the news arrived like arrows to the heart. The Philistines had won, the ark had been taken, her husband was dead, and so was her father-in-law. It was too much pain for one day. Her body, already weak from the weight of her pregnancy, could not take it. She went into labor right there, amid the mourning and panic. The midwives tried to cheer her up. "You have a son," but she did not respond. Her eyes were distant, fixed on something no one else could see. It was as if she could see not only the present, but also the future that was to come. With a weak, almost fading voice, she named the boy Ichabod, and she said, "The glory of Israel is gone." Ichabod, a heavy name, a lament in the form of a word. It wasn't just for the loss of her husband or father-in-law, it was more than a family tragedy. It was a spiritual milestone. The ark, the symbol of the covenant between God and the people, had been taken away. It was as if God's presence had left the house and left only emptiness behind. The boy was born, but what spread that night was the feeling that something had been broken. The lamps were still burning in Shiloh, but the light seemed different. The temple was still standing, but something inside it had collapsed. And while the people wept and the name Ichabod echoed as a sign of shame and loss far away among the Philistines, the ark was being carried away as a trophy. They thought they had defeated the God of Israel. They placed the ark in the temple of the god Dagon as if to display their conquest. But the God of Israel does not need an army to fight. And defeat is not always the end, because while the Philistines celebrated and Israel wept, the sky began to move in a way that no one expected. The Philistines carried the ark as if it were a trophy of war. They took it to Ashdod and placed it in the temple of Dagon, their god, as if to say, "Our God has defeated theirs." It was pure mockery, an affront. But the God of Israel does not need a sword, nor does he cry out for vengeance. He acts in silence and with precision. The next morning, the priests of Dagon entered the temple and froze. The statue of their god was lying on the floor, face down in the dust, before the ark. They tried to cover it up, lifting the statue, perhaps thinking it was just a coincidence. But the next day, Dagon was on the floor again, this time with his head and hands cut off. Only his torso remained. It was as if God was saying, "Here, there is only one God." But it didn't stop there. The entire city began to suffer. Tumors appeared on people. Terror took hold of Ashdod. So they decided to send the ark to another Philistine city. They thought the problem was local. They sent it to Gath. And guess what? Tumors there too. The same plague. Then they sent it to Ekron. And the people there didn't even want to receive it. "They want to kill us," they shouted. It was as if the very presence of the ark was an invisible sword. In 7 months, what began as a victory turned into an unbearable burden. The Philistines were in a panic. They gathered their priests and diviners and asked, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" The answer was clear: return it, but not empty-handed. Send an offering along with it, a confession. And so they did. They placed the ark on an ox cart with objects of gold as a sign of guilt and let the animals go alone, without a guide. And the oxen went straight to Beth Shemesh, Israeli territory. But not everyone in Israel understood what this meant. And there, even with the ark back, something unexpected happened. The cart with the ark followed the path as if guided by invisible hands. It climbed hills, crossed valleys, and stopped in Beth Shemesh, a city of the people of Israel. The farmers were harvesting wheat when they saw the ark coming alone, pulled by oxen. They stopped everything. They dropped their tools. It was unbelievable. After months, God's presence was back. They shouted, celebrated, and offered sacrifices, joy mixed with amazement. But not everyone understood the significance of it all. Some, out of curiosity or ignorance, opened the ark. They wanted to see what was inside, to touch what was holy. They couldn't, they shouldn't have, and they paid dearly. 70 men died that day. The people were terrified. Joy turned to fear. "Who can stand before the Lord, this holy God?" they asked, and they decided to send the ark to another city. Once again, God's presence was treated as something uncomfortable, difficult to deal with. Meanwhile, Samuel grew up. He was no longer the quiet boy who served in the temple. Now he was a prophet. The voice of God, which had once been rare, began to be heard frequently, and it was through him. The people began to listen, to seek direction. A new era was dawning on the horizon, but the marks of the old generation were still there. The name Ichabod was still remembered, like a painful whisper about what happens when respect for the sacred is lost. Eli was already gone. Hophni and Phinehas too. His priestly lineage had been cut off as God had warned. The temple continued, the people continued, but the story of that man, the man who saw everything, knew everything but did little, still echoed. Now, looking at all this, the question that remains between the pages is, what can we learn from Eli's life and downfall? Because his story was not just a tragedy. It was a warning, a mirror, and perhaps more than anything else, a call. Eli's story ends before the temple falls, before the glory leaves, but the lesson it leaves behind lives on. Was he a good man? Yes. Devoted? Also. But sometimes being good is not enough. Eli knew the voice of God. He knew the laws. He knew the altar. He just no longer knew the urgency of obeying firmly. He saw the mistake. He knew the sin. But he hesitated. And that hesitation cost him dearly. He loved his sons, that's for sure. But love that does not correct becomes complicity. And Eli, even though he knew that Hophni and Phinehas were playing with what was holy, did not send them away. He spoke to them, yes, but with a gentleness that did not match the gravity of the situation. It was as if he was afraid to break the bond, as if he preferred to keep the peace within his home, even with war brewing before God. Eli teaches us that leadership without courage weakens the people, that presence without purpose becomes routine, that faith does not survive on tradition alone. He had the position, the respect, the history, but he lost his spiritual weight. And when the glory was gone, not even all the priestly linen could hold it. His fall was silent, like someone slowly fading away, not because God hated him, but because he didn't take a stand when it was most needed. And that's where the pain of history lies. Not in seeing a bad man punished, but in seeing a chosen man cast aside for being too silent. And today, when we look at Eli's life, the question is not, how could he let this happen? But how many times do we also see it, know it, and do nothing? Because the call is not only for those who have a title, but for everyone who claims to know the voice of God. And the voice still calls, even on silent days, as it called Samuel, as it tried to reach Eli, as it may be calling now. If you liked Eli's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.